The Dallas Stars suffered a brutal defeat at the hands of the Vancouver Canucks on Monday night. And on today's show, we will talk about what went wrong in this game and talk about the sprinkle of positivity and then get you caught up today on everything you need to know about the insane race for the wild card spots in the Western Conference, all coming up on a Tuesday episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy there, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering your Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars media, coming to you on this Tuesday, April 19th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener of the show, thank you for stopping by and making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube and leave a comment if you feel so inclined, if you enjoy the show or have some thoughts and opinions on the Dallas Stars, and hit the follow button on your favorite podcasting platform, and be sure to leave a rating or review if you like what you hear. But let's jump right into today's show without any further hesitation, talking about last night's disastrous game for the Stars and Vancouver, a game that I say disastrous. I mean, starting out, it seemed like that they maybe were controlling parts of the game. They did go down early 1-0, but then evened it back up with a pretty quick and pretty nice power play goal from Roope Hintz, a really pretty pass from Alexander Radulov on that play. Really good stuff early on from the Stars, and then even getting a shorthanded goal to cut a 3-1 deficit down to a 3-2 deficit in the second period. But after a Jason Dickinson goal after that, things just went downhill for the Stars from that point on. And really from kind of the middle of the second period onward into the third, it was just Vancouver all night long, just absolutely destroying the Stars on every single front, it seemed like. And, you know, it's just so frustrating because this Vancouver Canucks team has had the Stars number all season long. Only 3 matchups this season, but really they've controlled and dominated the majority of all 3 of those matchups. And, you know, they're a good team, but you know, they seem to just kick it up a notch against the Dallas Stars. And I guess in the Stars' defense, this is one of, if not the hottest team in the league right now. They've now won 6 games in a row and are still very much alive in the playoff race after Monday night's game. They were still alive in the playoff race somewhat, but a game like this and the Vegas Golden Knights loss to the New Jersey Devils has certainly made the playoffs a lot bigger of a reality for this Vancouver team after Monday night's events. And so, you know, just again, a terrible way to start off this road trip for the Stars, who now have 2 more difficult opponents on the schedule this week in Edmonton and Calgary, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this show. And then, of course, talk about a little bit later in this week as well. But one of the more disappointing parts of this game was really Jake Oettinger having one of his worst nights of the year. And I mean, you can't pin all of it on him. A lot of the plays where Vancouver scored while he was in net, you could probably pinpoint one or multiple players who maybe missed an assignment or did not cover a guy as well as they could have. I know on that first goal, Alexander Radulov was like spinning in circles and really just did not seem to know where he was going on that Connor Garland goal. And it was just frustrating. I think that there was just kind of a mental lapse with a lot of the skaters out there on the ice for this Stars team. And so, and maybe on Jake Oettinger's side as well. I mean, he's been really good this season, but you know, I guess maybe he was due for a performance like this. And, you know, even after some good performances as of late, maybe he just needed to get one more bad one out of his system before the final home stretch of the season. I imagine we'll see him at least one more time on this road trip with the back-to-back coming up on Wednesday and Thursday. But I just feel awful for him having to get pulled in a situation like this. And Scott Wedgwood did give up a goal as well. But just a tough outing for Jake. And, you know, again, you can't pin all of it on him. I mean, some of the saves or some of the goals you could argue probably could have been saves on his end, but also not getting as much help from his defense with the absence of guys like Vlad Nemestikov and especially Esa Lindell. And, you know, you just can't really play defense like that if you're the Stars, because goalie confidence does come a lot of times from, you know, your ability to trust your teammates. And, you know, if you're having a good game defensively, I think that gives a little bit of confidence and mojo to your goalie. And I just don't think the Stars were delivering that very well in this matchup. And so I think in turn that affects Jake Ottinger's confidence in his ability to see things and read things. And I think a team as offensively talented as Vancouver, especially in the position they are in right now at this stage in the season, they're going to take advantage of that. And they did just that with a lot of the weapons that we talked about on Monday's episode before the game. Brock Besser had a pretty big game. I think he had 3 points on the night. Former Dallas star, like I mentioned, Jason Dickinson gets a goal. Connor Garland has been very good for this team all season. And of course, Elias Pettersson gets the final tally on an empty net to seal the deal for Vancouver. I mean, they were up 5-2 anyway. The deal was already sealed at that point, but a 6-2 nail in the coffin for Pettersson, who has been a star killer this season and probably a guy that will be a thorn in the side of this franchise for years to come, as he is one of the brighter talents in the National Hockey League. And who knows where this Canucks team is going to go for the remainder of this season. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the third segment of the show when we take a broader look at the Western Conference wildcard playoff race, because it is continuing to be dramatic and insane for seemingly a very unnecessary reason. But and this is, again, just, this game makes me nervous for the remainder of this road trip, but also just the remainder of the season. I mean, you got to, at least be competitive in these games. You still have a game in hand on the Vegas Golden Knights. And thankfully, with their loss to the New Jersey Devils, the standings don't really change. Nashville has now actually jumped back in front of the Stars for the top wildcard spot. On Monday morning, the Stars have the top spot because they had one less loss than Nashville, but now I think they have an identical record, but Nashville has the tiebreaker with the season series, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, that's kind of how it shapes out. So if the season ended today, Nashville would be playing Calgary in round one, and the Dallas Stars would be playing the Colorado Avalanche, with Vegas and Vancouver being out. But both Vegas and Vancouver still very much alive in the playoff race. Winnipeg technically still not eliminated, but only with 81 points as of right now. And it would take a lot of chaos and shenanigans for them to make it into the Stanley Cup playoffs as of right now. But, we've been saying that for a while now about them and Vancouver is still fighting very, very hard. But their most recent victims are the Stars, who now have, probably a little bit of damaged confidence going into the rest of this week. But this is a game that you have to shake off very quickly, learn from your mistakes, adjust, and then get ready to play on Wednesday, because that is going to be one heck of a battle. I mean, speaking of teams that have had other teams' numbers, Vancouver has had Dallas's number all season, but Dallas has had Edmonton's all season, with 2 wins against the Oilers, but both of those wins coming at the American Airlines Center. This will be the first and only time the Stars take on the Oilers in Alberta, in Edmonton's home building, where McDavid and Draisaitl have been fantastic all year long, as well as pretty much the rest of that Oilers team. That is a tough building to go into and get a win. And so the Stars will have to be extremely well prepared and not have any remembrance of this game on their minds. They will have to, have a clean slate mentally and physically if they want to win this matchup on Wednesday. Well, coming up next, we will continue to talk a little bit about this Monday night matchup and talk about some of the positives, which, spoiler alert, most of the positives have to do with number 24, Roope Hintz. But we'll talk about him after a quick break and a word from some of our sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season. They also have NHL odds. On Tuesday, the Nashville Predators are taking on the Calgary Flames, and the Flames right now are projected a minus 5.1 over the Predators. Even though the game is in Nashville, it's going to be probably one of the best games of the day in the National Hockey League. And so if you want to place a bet on that game or any other games in the NHL, NBA, MLB, be sure to do it at BetOnline.net. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to their website right now or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline.net, where the game starts. And we're trucking along on this Tuesday episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. This is your host, Dane Lewis, at Dane_Lewis on Twitter. You can give me a follow there. You can also follow our show's account on Twitter at Locked On Stars. Be sure to follow there if you do not do so already. But looking at this game against the Vancouver Canucks, it was a lot of doom and gloom. The Stars playing poorly at the offensive blue line, also the defensive blue line, just not playing well in the neutral zone either, and giving up a lot of opportunities to this Canucks team. But Roope Hintz, all things considered, had a pretty good night for himself. And like I said, the Stars started the game pretty well, and a lot of that had to do with getting a power play goal. The Dallas Stars go 1-for-1 on the power play. Again, a small step in the right direction as far as getting the power play back to its former glory of the season, if you will. Again, a really nice setup from Alexander Radulov, and Joe Pavelski gets credited with an assist as well. And Pavelski now has 75 points on the season. His career best, again, 79 points back in the 2013-2014 season when he was still in San Jose. And that assist also puts him, I believe, at 3 assists away from 500 in his career. So seems like it's going to be a pretty milestone-heavy stretch for Joe Pavelski to close out the year. 4 points is very attainable for a guy like him in these games, especially with some of the weaker opponents during the final homestand of the season, whether it's Arizona, Anaheim, Seattle, you name it, and probably even the Vegas game. He's going to have to step up and play a big role in that matchup. So no reason that he can't get 3 assists, if not more, as well as some goals to pad the overall point statistics and give him his best statistical year with the oldest that he's been in his entire career. You know, it's insane. A guy at his age 37, continuing to truck along like he has. Truly incredible. So, you know, he gets the helper on Roope's goal, and Roope Hintz now has 34 goals on the year because then he went on to score a shorthanded goal whenever the Canucks were on one of their 2 power plays. That's another nice part. The Stars had a good night on special teams. They're really the only part of the game that they won, going 2 for 2 on the PK and 1 for 1 on the power play. And one of those PKs, like I said, Roope Hintz gets a beautiful goal there, beats Thatcher Demko. And, you know, it seemed at that moment that the Stars might be able to stay in this game and be competitive, but that was kind of the last shining bright moment for Roope. But he's had a really good season. Looking at his stats after this game, I mean, he is really just grown and gotten better every year since he started with the Stars back in 2018, 2019. He had 22 points in his first season. Then he had 33 points in his second season. He had 43 points last season. And now he's all the way up to 66. I mean, he was making good jumps, about 10 points more each season, but now he's gone over 20 points from what he had last season. And the season still is not over. I mean, I imagine he'll probably reach 70, 75 points on the year, if not more. And maybe could even be a 50 goal scorer, not 50, a 40 goal scorer, excuse me, with 34 goals. I got my numbers mixed up thinking he had 43. So it's definitely a possibility that he could be a 40 goal guy, joining Jason Robertson in that regard for the Stars. And overall, just adding to what has been a fantastic year for the top line, but especially Roope Hintz, who will likely get paid a good amount of money at the end of next season whenever he is due for a new contract. And hopefully it is the Stars paying him that money, because if they're going to keep Jason Robertson, who I imagine will probably get re-signed during this offseason, I think it would be smart to keep Roope Hintz involved in that mix as well and let them be a dominant, dynamic duo going forward for this franchise for years to come. But, you know, the guys like Joe Pavelski and Alexander Radulov and Roope Hintz had their impact felt on this game. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier that, you know, Dallas was missing guys on the ice like Esa Lindell and Vlad Nemestikov. Guys like that bring a huge physical edge in this game. This game, you know, was kind of predicted to be a physical playoff atmosphere type game, and it was just that. We saw Jamie Benn get in a fight trying to stick up for one of his guys. I can't remember who got hit now off the top of my head, but or I think Jamie Benn actually hit a member of the Vancouver Canucks team, and then he gets in a fight with Luke Shin. And Luke Shin's trying to stand up for one of his guys. But then Jason Robertson also took a pretty big hit. I can't remember from who, but then he comes back around and lays a big hit just like 15, 20 seconds later on his own, not needing Jamie Benn or anyone else to stand up for him. He said, I will take care of business myself. But still, the Stars, despite being as physical as they could be, Jamie Benn, Jason Robertson, missing the presence of some of the bigger bodies on the team, more physical guys on the team in Esa and Vladislav Nemestikov. And hopefully those guys can be back sometime soon, because this team is at its best when it is fully healthy, especially on the defensive front. I think, you know, we've just been going through these phases of missing defensemen, whether it's Klingberg early in the year, Miro Heiskanen with Mono, and now Esa Lindell, where you start to see individually, you know, the value that each guy provides in their own respect, doing different things, because all 3 of those defensemen do different things especially well. And I think Esa Lindell is one of the better actual pure defensemen on the team. I mean, he can be a threat offensively, but ultimately he's at his best, I think, in the defensive zone. And I think that could be a huge reason why the Canucks had 6 goals in this matchup. And so certainly going to be good to have him back once the Stars can, finally get him back and healthy. And the same with Vladislav Nemestikov, who, can provide a little bit of offense every now and then, but ultimately is, like we've said, a plug and play guy that, is kind of similar to Erotic Fox. So Luke Glendening, Michael Raffle, a checking kind of guy that if you get some goals or assists and some offense from him, that's just kind of icing on the cake of what else he can do, which is maybe win some faceoffs or play really physical along the boards or lay a big hit if you need it. And it all just boils down to, naming those guys. As Dallas just needs that secondary scoring and that secondary, edge of play from some of the guys on the roster that are not on the top line, whether it's Sagan and Ben and Gurionov or, Glendening, Raffle, Fox, Essen Lindell, Miro Haskin, and John Klingberg. I mean, we need guys to step up more consistently in order to avoid these kind of results like we saw against the Vancouver Canucks. And, if the trends of this season are any indication, Dallas is due for an excellent performance in Vancouver. Very rarely do they have these games where they just get blown out and kind of, flipped over and kind of thrown out of sorts and discombobulated. They rarely have those games back to back. So, not saying it's a guaranteed win against the Edmonton Oilers, but I imagine they'll play a lot sharper and a lot more disciplined. And it should probably be a little bit more of a tighter matchup on Wednesday in Edmonton. Well, coming up next, we will continue to talk about the Dallas Stars and their position in the Western Conference playoff race, because it is continuing to be dramatic and insane and almost out of control at this point. But it's a incredibly fun storyline to follow here in the final stages of the season. It's all coming up after another quick break. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is also brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every single customer, and they have everything that you could possibly need for your car or truck, including brake parts, motor oil, tail lamps, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car or truck will ever need at rockauto.com. And we're closing out today's episode of Locked On Stars, talking about the Western Conference wildcard playoff picture and even a little bit of the Pacific Division playoff picture. The race for the wild card is still crazy. It is tight. It is very close right now. At this moment of recording, late Monday night, early Tuesday morning, the Nashville Predators have the top wildcard spot, 91 points. The Dallas Stars also 91 points, holding the second wildcard spot. The Vegas Golden Knights behind them, 4 points with 87. The Vancouver Canucks, after Monday's win, now have 86 points, only 1 point behind the Vegas Golden Knights, in contention for wildcard spots, but also potentially the third spot in the Pacific Division. The LA Kings have been shaky as of late, which means the Golden Knights or the Canucks could sneak in to that third spot in the Pacific Division behind Calgary and Edmonton. The Kings currently only have 90 points right now, and they are also thankful for the New Jersey Devils at this point in time, because a win there would have put the VGK at 89 points, only 1 point behind the Los Angeles Kings, which would have made things very interesting in that division. So the Kings will be looking to try to win some of their games that they have coming up. They do have a game tonight against the Anaheim Ducks in Anaheim, a game that they probably should win, but the Ducks out of the playoff picture, maybe looking to cause a little bit of chaos in their division and maybe looking to try to knock off the Kings and prevent them from distancing themselves from their other division rivals in the Golden Knights and the Vancouver Canucks. But some other teams in this playoff race on the schedule tonight as well. The Nashville Predators are playing at home at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville against the Calgary Flames. That's going to be an incredibly interesting matchup to watch. Should be a fun game and a pretty challenging one for Nashville, but they're playing at home, and that's going to benefit them and give them at least a shot to win this game. But Calgary is a tough team to beat, even on the road. I think they have one of the better road records in the NHL this season, but regardless, they are a red-hot team, no pun intended, for their color scheme and logos, and they've just been a tough outing pretty much ever since the All-Star break came to a conclusion. And even before, the Dallas Stars know that all too well, and they're going to be matched up against them in Calgary later this week on Thursday. And the Vancouver Canucks also play again. They have Ottawa coming into town. Both teams coming into a second game of a back-to-back. The Ottawa Senators played in Seattle on Monday night, and of course, Vancouver played Dallas at home. So that's a pretty favorable matchup for the Canucks, who could potentially leapfrog the Vegas Golden Knights in the standings with a win, and the Vegas Golden Knights not playing. And also, if the LA Kings lose, could be within shouting distance of catching the Kings. So a lot of potential movement in the coming days, and really probably here in the last 2 weeks or so of the regular season. Things look like this right now: Nashville, Dallas, Vancouver, or Vegas, Vancouver, and those last two Pacific teams in pursuit of LA in the third spot in the Pacific. So don't expect things to look this way in a couple weeks. Things will probably get shifted around and moved quite a bit, but Dallas just needs to try to control what they can control. Again, I can't emphasize the importance enough of them needing to learn from their mistakes from this Monday night loss to the Canucks, but also shake off any of the bad feelings and broken confidence and approach this Wednesday game against the Oilers with a brand new, a fresh slate. Clean up the mental slate, clean up the physical slate, and go into this game fresh, headstrong, and confident that you can go out and beat this team, because the Stars have beaten this team twice, and what have been, or at least one of the games was close and competitive. That game back around Thanksgiving was actually pretty favorable for the Stars, and they seem to be in control for most of that matchup. So they need to play some of their best hockey to come into this game and get a huge win on Wednesday and control what they can control. I mean, who cares what these other teams do? As long as the Stars go out and win hockey games, they will be just fine, and they will be in a great position to make the playoffs. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and drop a comment if you enjoyed the show, and let me know what your thoughts are on the Dallas Stars and where they stand in this Western Conference wildcard playoff race, and also just any maybe talking points that you want to hear discussed on the show. Always do appreciate getting the awesome comments from you guys on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, be sure to hit that follow button on there and leave a rating or review if you like what you hear. It's free, and it only takes a couple seconds to do so. You can also find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and at Locked On Stars. Be sure to give us a follow at both of those spots if you do not do so already. And be sure to tune into tomorrow's show, as we will be getting you prepared for the final matchup between the Stars and Oilers this season. Going to be a good time. We'll see you there, Stars fans. Have a great Tuesday.